The smell of burning bread was the first sign that the war had finally caught up with them. Sergeant Klaus Brenner pulled the blackened loaves from the field oven and threw them into the mud, cursing under his breath as American artillery thundered somewhere to the west. For 3 years, he had managed to stay behind the lines, feeding Wehrmacht soldiers while the world tore itself apart. Now, in April 1945, the lines no longer existed. The Americans were everywhere. Germany was dying, and Klaus Brenner was about to become a prisoner of war without ever firing his rifle. Corporal Dieter Hahn stood at the entrance of the supply depot, watching the tree line with hollow eyes. "They're coming," he said quietly. "I can hear the engines." Young Private Emil Voigt dropped the potato he was peeling. He was 19 years old and had been conscripted 8 months ago. His hands were soft. He had never killed anyone. He had only made soup and coffee and listened to older soldiers tell stories about battles he hoped he would never see. "What do we do?" Emil asked. Brenner wiped his hands on his apron. He was 43 years old. He had served in the last war as a young man, and he remembered what American soldiers looked like. He remembered that they gave chocolate to children and took prisoners instead of shooting them. The SS would have fought to the death. But Brenner was not SS. He was a cook. "We surrender," he said. The American patrol arrived 20 minutes later. There were 12 of them, muddy and exhausted, their uniforms stained with the filth of weeks of continuous combat. Their leader was a captain with tired eyes and a voice that sounded like gravel scraping against stone. His name was James Callahan, though his men called him Jimmy. Before the war, he had owned a small restaurant in Chicago. Now he commanded an infantry company that had fought from Normandy to the Rhine, losing men in every village and forest along the way. Callahan looked at the 3 Germans standing with their hands raised, flour dusting their uniforms, and almost laughed. Almost. He had seen too much death to find anything funny anymore. "Cooks," he said to his sergeant. "We captured cooks." They secured the depot and inventoried the supplies. There was enough food to feed a battalion for a week. Flour, canned meat, dried vegetables, even coffee. Callahan's men had been surviving on cold rations for days. This was a treasure. Then the radio crackled. A forward patrol had found something 2 kilometers east in an abandoned SS compound. Women, prisoners, kept there for purposes that made Callahan's stomach turn when the report came through. He had heard rumors about such places. The Nazi regime had established a network of forced brothels throughout the concentration camp system, places called Lagerbordell, where women prisoners were coerced into sexual slavery. The SS told the world these women were volunteers. Everyone knew the truth. They were slaves, selected from camps like Ravensbrück and Auschwitz, promised better food and conditions if they complied. Those who refused were sent back to die. Callahan listened to the report in silence. 19 women, some German, some Polish, some from other occupied nations. All of them starving, all of them sick, all of them carrying wounds that no medic could heal. Transport would not arrive for 3 days. The roads were clogged with retreating German units and advancing Allied columns. Until then, these women were his responsibility. That he looked at the German cooks. He looked at the field kitchen filled with supplies. "You 3, he said. "You're going to cook." Brenner blinked. "For your soldiers?" "No." Callahan pointed east toward the compound. "For the women your army kept in cages." The silence that followed was heavier than any artillery barrage. Dieter Hahn's face twisted with something that might have been discussed. Emil Voigt went pale, his hands trembling at his sides. Brenner stared at the American captain for a long moment. He wanted to say that he had nothing to do with those places. He wanted to say that he was just a cook, that he had never hurt anyone, that he had only followed orders and kept his head down and tried to survive. But he knew those words meant nothing. He had spent 3 years feeding an army that built those camps. He had never asked questions. He had never wanted to know. "Yes, sir," Brenner said quietly. Emil Voigt felt his chest tighten. 2 years ago, his older sister Liesel had been taken by the SS. She had been caught hiding food for a Jewish family in their village. The last time Emil saw her, she was being loaded into a truck, her face streaked with tears, her hand reaching toward him through the canvas covering, but he never learned where they took her. He never found out if she was alive or dead. Now he was being ordered to cook for women who had suffered the same fate. His hand stopped trembling. He picked up the potato he had dropped and began peeling again. Whatever waited in that compound, he would face it. He owed Liesel that much. The compound smelled like despair. Emil Voigt noticed at the moment the American truck passed through the gate, a thick, sour odor of unwashed bodies, sickness, and something else he could not name. Fear, perhaps, or shame, or the slow rot of hope dying in a place where hope had no right to exist. The SS had abandoned the compound 3 days before the Americans arrived. They had burned documents and destroyed records, but they had not bothered to take the women. To the SS, these prisoners were inventory to be discarded, not people worth saving. They had simply locked the doors and left, expecting the women to die before anyone found them. American soldiers had broken through the locks and given the survivors blankets and water. Now 19 women sat in a barren hall that had once been a dining room for SS officers, their hollow eyes staring at nothing, their bodies wrapped in olive drab wool that seemed to swallow them whole. Sergeant Rosa Delgado was the first person they had spoken to. She was an army nurse from New Mexico, 31 years old, with dark hair pinned beneath her cap and a voice that could calm a dying man. She had seen terrible things in field hospitals across France and Belgium. She thought nothing could shock her anymore. She had been wrong. They won't eat from the hands of German soldiers, Rosa told Captain Callahan when the cooks arrived. You need to understand that. These women were brutalized by men in those uniforms. Some of them will panic. Some of them will refuse food entirely. Callahan nodded grimly. Then you serve them. The cooks will prepare the food. You and my men will distribute it. Rosa looked at the 3 Germans. The old one, Brenner, carried a heavy pot of soup with steady hands. The middle one, Han, stood apart with his arms crossed, his jaw tight with barely concealed contempt. The young one, Voigt, stared at the women with an expression Rosa could not read. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. Fine, she said, but keep that one away from them. She pointed at Han. I don't like the way he's looking at them. The first meal was soup. Brenner had made it from canned vegetables and dried meat, seasoning it with salt and the last of the pepper from the depot supplies. It was simple food, soldier food, but it was hot and filling. Rosa ladled it into tin cups and carried them to the women one by one. Most of them ate in silence, their hands shaking, their eyes never lifting from the floor. A few refused, turning their faces away when Rosa approached. One woman, older than the others, with gray streaks in her dark hair, spoke quietly in German. Why are they here? She asked, nodding toward the cooks. Why you make them watch us? Rosa did not speak German, but Emil Voigt heard the question. He stepped forward before anyone could stop him. We are here to feed you, he said in German. Nothing more. The woman studied him with eyes that had seen too much. You wear the uniform of our captors. I know. Emil's voice cracked. I am sorry. Dieter Hahn made a sound of disgust from the doorway. You apologize to these creatures? Have you no pride? Emil spun around. What did you say? You heard me. Han's lip curled. These women are traitors and whores. They spread their legs for SS officers while real Germans died fighting for the fatherland. They deserve nothing. Emil crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed Han by the collar, slamming him against the wall. My sister was taken to a place like this, he hissed. She was not a traitor. She was not a whore. She was brave, and they destroyed her for it. Han shoved him back. Then your sister was weak. That is why they took her. The strong survive. The weak are used and discarded. That is the natural order. Emil's fist connected with Han's jaw before he could say another word. The 2 men crashed to the floor, grappling and swinging until American soldiers pulled them apart. Captain Callahan ordered Han confined to a storage room under armed guard. That night, after the women had eaten and the cooks had been escorted back to their quarters, Emil sat alone outside the compound, staring at the stars. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks. Somewhere in the distance, artillery still rumbled, but here, in this small pocket of silence, the war felt far away that a woman's voice startled him. You spoke of a sister. Emil turned. One of the survivors stood a few meters away, wrapped in an American blanket. She was thin, her cheekbones sharp beneath papery skin, but her eyes held a quiet strength that made him catch his breath. Her name was Liesel, Emil said. Liesel Voigt. She was taken 2 years ago. The woman was silent for a long moment. Then she said, I knew a Liesel, in the camp before this one. She sang hymns at night when the guards are not listening. She helped the rest of us remember that we were still human. Emil felt tears burn his eyes. Is she alive? I do not know. They moved us many times. But I know she never stopped singing, even when they punished her for it. Emil buried his face in his hands and wept. By the third morning, Klaus Brenner had not slept more than 2 hours. He stood in the field kitchen before dawn, kneading dough with hands that ached from the cold, his mind refusing to let him rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces, the hollow cheeks, the empty stares, the way they flinched when he came too close. He had spent 3 years feeding soldiers who marched off to commit atrocities he pretended not to know about. Now the evidence of those atrocities sat in a ruined compound 200 meters away. Eating soup from his pots, he could not undo what had been done, but he could make better bread. The field kitchen had basic supplies: flour, water, salt, a small amount of yeast that had survived the chaos of retreat. But Brenner wanted more. He traded his cigarettes to American soldiers for sugar. He foraged wild herbs from the edge of the forest, rosemary and thyme that grew stubborn and green despite the destruction around them. He worked through the night, shaping loaves with the care of a man building something sacred. Nurse Rosa Delgado found him at sunrise, pulling golden loaves from the oven. You look terrible, she said. Brenner shrugged. I have looked worse. Why do you try so hard? They're just prisoners. You'll never see them again after transport arrives. Brenner was quiet for a long time. He set the bread on a wooden board and stared at it, his weathered face unreadable. I never asked questions, he finally said. For 3 years, I cooked for the Wehrmacht. I made meals for officers who ordered mass executions. I fed soldiers who burned villages and shot civilians. I saw trucks come and go in the night, and I never asked where they went or what they carried. He looked at Rosa with eyes that held a lifetime of guilt. I told myself it was not my war. I was just a cook. I only followed orders. I kept my head down and survived. He gestured toward the compound. But those women are the result of my silence. Every man who looked away, who pretended not to see, who told himself it was someone else's responsibility. We built those camps together. We fed the machine that destroyed them. Rosa did not know what to say. She had seen German soldiers as enemies for so long that she had forgotten they were also human beings, capable of guilt and regret and shame. The bread looks good, she said quietly. Brenner nodded. It is the only thing I know how to do, so I will do it well. That afternoon, everything changed. Dieter Hahn had been confined to a storage room since the fight with Emil. 2 American privates guarded the door in shifts, but they were exhausted from weeks of combat, and their attention wandered. Hahn waited for his moment. When the guard on duty fell asleep, Hahn slipped out through a window and stole a rifle from an unattended supply stack. He did not try to escape. He walked straight to the women's hall. Captain Callahan was reviewing reports in a commandeered office when he heard the shouting. He grabbed his sidearm and ran, arriving just as Hahn burst through the door of the hall, the stolen rifle raised. You bring shame to Germany. Hahn screamed at the women. You should have died before you let them touch you. You are traitors. Collaborators. The women did not scream. They had forgotten how. They simply stared at him with the same hollow eyes they had worn since the day they were taken, their bodies frozen, their minds retreating to the dark places where they had learned to hide from pain. Callahan did not hesitate. He raised his pistol and fired once, hitting Hahn in the leg. The German collapsed, the rifle clattering across the floor, his screams echoing off the bare walls. American soldiers swarmed into the room. They dragged Hahn away, his blood leaving a dark trail on the concrete. Rosa Delgado rushed to check on the women, but none of them had moved. They sat in perfect stillness, like statues carved from grief. Then the youngest spoke. Her name was Anya. She was 16 years old, though she looked younger, a girl from a small village in Poland who had been taken from her family 2 years ago. She had not said a word since the Americans found her. The nurses thought she might never speak again, but now, in the silence after the gunshot, her voice emerged like a whisper from a grave. "We did not let them," she said. "We were never asked." The room went silent. Rosa felt tears slide down her cheeks. Callahan lowered his weapon, his hands trembling. Anya looked at the American captain with eyes that held no accusation, only exhaustion. "They took us. They used us. They told us we volunteered. But we were never asked." It was the first time anyone had spoken the truth aloud. The first time anyone had acknowledged what had really happened in these places. Brenner stood in the doorway, holding a tray of fresh bread. He had arrived just in time to hear her words. That he set the tray down carefully and walked away. For the first time since the war began, Klaus Brenner prayed. Dawn came gray and cold on the fourth day, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. The transport trucks arrived at first light, 6 canvas-covered vehicles from the 12th Evacuation Hospital, sent to carry the women to a proper medical facility behind the lines. The war would end in 3 weeks, though no one knew it yet. Berlin was burning. Hitler was hiding in his bunker. The Reich that had promised 1,000 years of glory was collapsing into ash and rubble. But here, in this forgotten compound in the German countryside, 19 women prepared to leave the place where they had lost everything. Emil Voigt watched them gather their meager belongings. A blanket here, a scrap of cloth there, small tokens the Americans had given them. They moved slowly, their bodies still weak from months of starvation and abuse. But something had changed in the past 3 days. They stood straighter now. Some of them had color in their cheeks. One woman had smiled that morning when Rosa Delgado told her the trucks were coming to IT was not recovery. Recovery would take years if it came at all. But it was the first step, the first breath of air after drowning. Marta, the woman who had known Liesel, found Emil standing by the gate. "You have been kind," she said in German. "That is rare in this war." Emil shook his head. "I have done nothing. I only cooked. You wept for your sister. You fought for our dignity. You treated us like human beings." Marta reached out and touched his arm gently. "That is not nothing." Emil felt his throat tighten. "Will you tell me, did Liesel survive? Do you know for certain?" Marta's eyes filled with sadness. "I do not know. The SS moved us many times. Ravensbrück, then smaller camps, then here. I lost track of her after the second transfer." She paused, but I know she was brave until the end. She never stopped believing that someone would come for her. "Someone should have," Emil whispered. "I should have. You were a boy. There was nothing you could do." Marta squeezed his arm. "But you're doing something now. You are bearing witness. You are remembering. That is what Liesel would want." The women began loading into the trucks. Nurse Delgado helped the weakest ones climb aboard, her hands steady, her voice calm. She had volunteered to accompany them to the hospital. Captain Callahan had approved the transfer without hesitation. "These women need someone who understands," Rosa had told him. "Someone who has seen what they survived. I can be that person." Callahan had looked at her for a long moment. Then he had nodded. "Do what you can for them, Sergeant. God knows they deserve it." Now the captain stood by the lead truck, watching his soldiers prepare for departure. The German cooks would leave soon too, transported to a POW camp near the French border. They would be interrogated, processed, and eventually released, assuming they were not found complicit in war crimes. Most cooks were cleared quickly. They had only followed orders. Brenner approached Callahan, his cap in his hands. "Captain," he said, "may I ask a question?" Callahan nodded. "What will happen to them?" "The women. Hospital first, then displaced persons camp. Eventually, they'll try to go home, if they have homes left to go to, and then—" Callahan's jaw tightened. "Then they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to forget what was done to them. Most of them won't succeed." He looked at Brenner with hard eyes. "Is that what you wanted to hear?" Brenner lowered his head. "No, but it is what I needed to hear." He walked back to join Emil and waited for the truck that would take them to imprisonment. He did not look at the compound again. He could not bear to. The women's trucks started their engines. One by one, they pulled through the gate and turned onto the muddy road leading west. 19 women, leaving behind a place of nightmares, heading toward an uncertain future in a broken world. As the last truck passed, something unexpected happened. Anya, the youngest survivor, pulled back the canvas flap and looked out. Her eyes found Emil and Brenner standing by the gate. She raised her hand and waved at it. Was a small gesture, almost invisible. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness was too much to ask, too soon, perhaps forever. But it was acknowledgement, recognition, a silent message that said, "You saw us. You fed us. You reminded us that we were human." Brenner raised his hand in return. Emil did the same. The truck disappeared over the hill. The compound fell silent. 2 hours later, American soldiers began burning documents found in the SS administration building. Captain Callahan supervised the destruction personally, watching papers curl and blacken in the flames. Most of the records were mundane: supply requests, transfer orders, duty rosters. But one item made him stop. It was a photograph. 19 women standing in front of a gray building, their faces blank, their eyes empty. On the back, someone had written in German, "Inventory, March 1945. Callahan stared at the word. Inventory. They had called these women inventory, like sacks of flour or crates of ammunition. He threw the photograph into the fire and watched it burn. "Not anymore," he said quietly. The flames consumed the image, erasing it from history. But Callahan knew the truth would survive. Somewhere, in the memories of those 19 women, in the nightmares they would carry forever, the story would endure. And perhaps, in some small way, the bread and soup and kindness of 3 German cooks would endure as well, a fragile light in the darkness, proof that even in the worst of times, humanity could still find its way home.